Subcommittee on Energy will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess of the subcommittee at any time. Welcome to today's hearing entitled The Electric Grid of the Future. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. By the way, we may have votes called just in short order, so we're going to probably be a little quicker than normal here. Not that anything we do here is very normal. Today we will hear from the Department of Energy, DOE, Los Alamos National Laboratory, the private sector, and Texas Tech University on research for creating the electric grid of the future. The goal of this research is to ensure energy delivery systems are reliable, resilient, and secure. A reliable grid delivers energy to consumers and businesses on demand regardless of the energy sources. A resilient grid keeps the energy flowing during an adverse event such as a hurricane and ensures a restoration of energy once an outage has occurred. A secure grid protects our energy infrastructure from hostile disruptions due to physical or cyber attacks, which are a growing risk as more industrial control systems are connected online. Thank you. The DOE Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability, OE, is leading the early-stage research and development programs that promise to deliver advancements in grid technology. Small but mighty, OE has the least amount of funding for applied energy programs at DOE, but carries out a vital mission through partnerships with industry and research conducted by the national labs. Los Alamos applies science expertise in physics, network science, algorithms, and applied mathematics to develop computational modeling and data analytics to help optimize modern electrical grids. Los Alamos developed these capabilities through its nuclear weapons mission. This kind of basic science expertise with multidisciplinary applications is part of what makes the National Lab system an incubator for new technologies and continues to advance research beyond its originally intended goals. Academia and industry are also partners on grid modernization research. Texas Tech University hosts the Global Laboratory for Energy Asset Management and Manufacturing, or GLEAM, facility that works to develop innovative power technologies and advance next-generation energy delivery technology. GLEAM focuses on wind, solar, battery storage, cybersecurity, and microgrid technologies that will all encompass the electrical grid of the future. Advanced grid technologies can have a significant impact when the grid is faced with weather-related events that can threaten reliability. This month brings the official start of the 2018 hurricane season, and last year communities in my home state of Texas, as well as Florida and Puerto Rico, lost power. Modern grid technology in Texas, such as the use of smart meters, were able to identify power outages and quickly help restore power after Hurricane Harvey. Unfortunately, while they have made significant progress rebuilding capabilities, there are still communities in Puerto Rico without power. That's why DOE, OE, and 5 national labs led by Oregon National Laboratory are working daily to provide grid modeling tools to Puerto Rico. The national labs are combining their current skills and capabilities in order to help Puerto Rico to plan, to operate, and to rebuild a more resilient grid. These models help grid operators better predict where the highest risk of power disruption could be and determine the potential impacts on critical power loads that support Puerto Rico's public health and its safety infrastructure. The national labs hope by improving existing grid models, the island will be able to make key investments in resilient energy infrastructure before the current hurricane season. Additional analysis will inform Puerto Rico on long-term investment priorities for electrical transmission, distribution, renewable energy, battery storage, microgrids, and strategic power reserves. The partnership between the federal government, the national labs, academia, and industry has the potential to transform energy delivery systems. As we continue supporting advanced grid research, I would like to learn more about how DOE can improve the development of new technology and our understanding of electrical systems. I want to thank our panel of witnesses for their testimony today, and I look forward to a positive discussion about grid modernization research. I now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Veazey, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my fellow Texan, and everyone else that is here today, our distinguished panel. Just last week, I want to remind everybody that a White House memo was leaked that raised several questions. It detailed a plan to direct the Energy Secretary, also from Texas, to use authorities vested in him from the Federal Power Act and the Defense Production Act to save coal and nuclear power plants. Section 202 of the Federal Power Act has historically been used to address energy supply concerns related to natural disasters or other major energy shortages. Likewise, the Defense Production Act is a Cold War-era statute that allows the President to nationalize elements of U.S. industry in the interest of national security. This proposal has been roundly criticized by a wide range of trusted, independent experts, including the Wall Street Journal editorial page, as poorly justified and legally dubious. Our utilities, states, and researchers do the hard work of hardening our energy infrastructure to cybersecurity threats and national disasters. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is inventing emergencies to bail out coal and nuclear plants while ignoring the real problems. I'm sure the White House views this legal loophole that surfaced in the leaked memo as an easy way to try to fulfill campaign promises, which is very bad and very unsound when it comes to energy policy. However, the real impact has not been thought through by the administration. It would wreak havoc on our energy markets and create a number of misaligned incentives. As severe weather driven by climate change becomes more intense and damaging to the electric grid, this administration wants to address the problem by offering financial bailouts and picking winners and losers as it relates to coal. And any reasonable person would agree that this seems backward. Moreover, it wouldn't do anything to make the electric grid more resilient. The grid experts that have examined the issue would characterize our nation's priorities far differently than this politically motivated administration does. That is why FERC unanimously rejected Secretary Perry's last proposal to bail out coal and nuclear power plants. And while the Trump administration works with coal CEOs to craft a plan to benefit the industry's bottom dollar, the American people are being left behind. And I look forward to hearing today from Mr. Gramlich today on his recent report titled A Customer-Focused Framework for Electric System Resilience. I can't think of a better way to approach this issue. The purpose of the electric grid is to provide reliable, affordable power to customers. Any conversation that does not first consider the customer is not worth having. And while I am critical of these actions by Secretary Perry on grid resilience, I want to be clear that I strongly support developing advanced technologies to enable carbon capture on coal-fired power plants in the next generation of nuclear reactors. In fact, I just introduced a bipartisan bill, H.R. 5745, the Fossil Energy Research and Development Act of 2018, that would authorize activities to support the development of technologies and methods for carbon capture, storage, utilization, and removal. It is the most comprehensive legislative proposal for fossil energy research in Congress today. So I certainly have no issues with federal support for these energy options. I just think that we need to be a lot smarter about how we approach these issues. We're very fortunate to have Assistant Secretary Bruce Walker with us today. I look forward to hearing justifications for the actions proposed by Secretary Perry in the White House memo as it was proposed to FERC. I also look forward to hearing your priorities for the Office of Electricity. In the FY 2019 budget proposal, the administration requested a severe 37% cut to the Office of Electricity and reorganization of these investments. I'm sure we'll discuss that here shortly. And again, while I'm not opposed to the reorganization in concept, I'm curious how splitting DOE's smallest energy technology offices into 2 offices will ensure that these activities continue to be a priority in years to come. And before I close, I also would like to take some personal privilege to note that unfortunately this will be the last time that Joe Florida will be staffing us here on the committee, at least in this Congress. That's because he recently won the Bosch Foundation Fellowship and will be heading to Germany in a few weeks. I know that staff on both sides of the aisle recognize that Joe has done a tremendous job for the subcommittee in his time here. Sehr gut, Herr Florida. Auf Wiedersehen. And we look forward to seeing you when you come back, he played a very key role in negotiating a bipartisan, bicameral legislative package, the Department of Energy Research and Innovation Act, that has since passed the House and is now advancing in the Senate. And he was the lead staffer in developing and vetting language for the fossil energy research bill that I previously mentioned. That bill has now been endorsed by a broad and impressive coalition of stakeholders, and I know that would not have happened without all the hard work that Joe put into this effort. We wish you luck, and I hope that we can find a way to work together again, and I know you're going to have a great opportunity overseas. Congratulations, Joe. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. I'm not sure what you said in German, but I did speak with Joey a few weeks back about them going over there and told him he needs to learn to speak German, but more importantly, since they're thinking about starting a family, he better learn to speak wife.
Yes.
I'm just saying. So thank you, Mr. Vesey. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The subcommittee today is going to examine the Department of Energy's effort to modernize the electrical grid, and I very much look forward to hearing what our witnesses have to say on that subject. DOE, our national laboratories and universities across the country are working to develop next-generation technologies that will make up our future electric grid. This is critical research and development will help address vulnerabilities that range from cyber attacks to natural disasters. Another challenge is developing grid-scale battery storage and incorporating that into our electric grid. Renewable energy and distributed energy resources are changing the way electricity is produced and delivered throughout the nation. These energy sources are intermittent and depend on the sun to shine and the wind to blow. Without the capacity to efficiently store the energy produced from renewable energy, these resources can only make a minimal contribution to America's electricity needs. Energy storage is the key to modernizing the grid without sacrificing reliability. My home state of Texas offers a ready example of the impact battery storage could have on harnessing renewable power. Texas is the top wind-producing state in the country. So it's no surprise that Sandia National Laboratory chose to partner with Texas Tech University on a wind energy field testing site in Lubbock, Texas. The Scaled Wind Farm Technology Facility, or SWIFT, brings together academia, industry, and the expertise found only at the national laboratories to test and develop wind energy technology. While SWIFT's primary objectives are to improve wind turbine performance and the efficiency of wind energy production, SWIFT also provides a test bed for supporting wind power with battery technology. Researchers at SWIFT are testing different battery chemistries and designs to harness the power of wind energy on demand. Breakthroughs in grid-scale battery storage technology will help incorporate renewable energy resources into the nation's energy mix. But scaling up batteries will necessitate addressing cost, efficiency, and size limitation problems. DOE research and development can provide these solutions and build the foundation for the next fundamental breakthrough in modern grid technology. And DOE continues to prioritize the Grid Modernization Initiative, a cross-cutting research program that harnesses the skill sets of individual labs to develop new grid technologies. At Los Alamos National Laboratory, home to one of our today's witnesses, researchers are developing new power system designs that will improve the reliability and resiliency of the grid. With the technical expertise developed through its nuclear weapons programs, Los Alamos uses applied mathematics and advanced modeling capabilities to research multiple energy resource delivery systems. The national laboratories are also home to the Joint Center for Energy Storage Research Energy Innovation Hub. The DOE Hub brings scientists, engineers, and manufacturers together in order to develop transformative energy storage technologies. H.R. 589, the DOE Research and Innovation Act, has passed the House and authorizes the Department of Energy Energy Innovation Hub program to continue this important collaborative research effort. By developing a better battery, national labs and universities can help the private sector lead the way and bring battery storage technology to the energy marketplace. This early-stage research will help create a modern, reliable, resilient grid, and that's what we all need in this country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back. Dana, hi. Oh, yeah.
thank the gentleman for yielding back. It is now my distinct privilege to yield to the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Get my breath. Let me thank all the witnesses for being here today. DOE's Office of Electricity Support Programs that are critical to improving the flexibility and reliability to our electric grid, while also enabling a broad range of clean energy resources to play a far larger role in our nation's power and transportation sectors. This is another reason that I'm so concerned about the administration's budget proposal for the department, which would cut funding for this office by 37%. And that overall cuts includes 62% cut to clean energy transmission and reliability, a 74% cut to smart grid research, and an 81% energy storage R&D, despite the fact that Secretary Perry has now referred to energy storage as the holy grail of energy in several congressional hearings. These large proposed cuts to energy reliability and resilience research are also curious in light of several recent proposals made by the Secretary to take unprecedented urgent actions that would prop up uneconomic power plants under the guise of ensuring the reliability and resilience of our electric grid. Independent experts across the political spectrum have resoundingly rejected these proposals in favor of a far more rigorous, well-justified approach to addressing these issues, while continuing to make substantial progress toward our nation's clean energy future. And I believe Mr. Gramlich will be able to discuss more in more detail. There's no reason that we can't have a secure, clean, reliable, and resilient energy sector that takes advantage of a broad range of our resource and technology options, including renewables, energy storage, nuclear power, and fossil fuels with carbon capture, without going to such an extreme of ill-conceived lengths to save one particular resource at the expense of the others. Lastly, I'd like to take this opportunity to note, sadly, that this will be the committee's last hearing staffed by Joe Frater, at least for now. He's worked for us over the last 5 years, started out as an intern, and rising to become one of the top staffers of our energy subcommittee team. He's done an outstanding job. He's the son of a nurse. He's done highly professional work throughout his time on the committee, including developing several substantive, well-vetted, bipartisan legislative proposals that I'm confident will continue to advance even as he moves to bigger and better things. He's leaving because he's won the prestigious Bosch Foundation Fellowship, and in a few weeks he'll be moving to Germany for 1 year. And I'd like to congratulate you, Joe, and wish you well, and hope you'll come back to see us after you've made our country proud. I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back, and I do echo her comments. Can we all give Joe a hand? I will introduce the witnesses. Our first witness today is the Honorable Bruce Walker, the Department of Energy's Assistant Secretary for the Office of Electricity and the Acting Assistant Secretary for the Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response. Assistant Secretary Walker has more than 25 years of electric utility experience, previously working as the Vice President of Asset Strategy and Policy at National Grid and Director of Corporate Emergency Management at Consolidated Edison of New York. He is the founder of Modern Energy Insights, Inc., and the co-founder of Global Smart Grid Federation. Assistant Secretary Walker has served as a member of DOE's Electricity Advisory Committee for the Megawatt Scale Integration Lab, and was a member of GridWise Alliance Incorporated. He was confirmed as Assistant Secretary by the United States Senate in October of 2017. He holds a Bachelor of Electrical Engineering from Manhattan College and a Juris Doctor in Law from Pace University, where he was the technical editor on the Environmental Law Review. Welcome, Mr. Walker. Our next witness is Dr. John Sarrao. Am I saying that right? Okay. The Principal Director for Science, Technology, and Engineering at Los Alamos National Laboratory. Previously, Dr. Sarrao was the Program Director for Los Alamos Office of Science Programs and Matter Radiation Interactions in Extremes Facility. From 2013 to 2018, he served as LANL's Associate Director for Theory, Simulation, and Computation, where he applied science-based prediction to existing and emerging national security missions. Dr. Sarrao has held a number of leadership positions within LANL's materials community, including Division Leader of the Materials Physics and Applications Division and Group Leader of Condensed Matter and Thermal Physics. He has also served on a number of DOE Basic Energy Sciences Advisory Committees, BSAC, subcommittees, helping to set strategic directions for materials research. Dr. Sarrao is a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the American Physical Society, and Los Alamos National Laboratory. He received his PhD in physics from the University of California at Los Angeles. Welcome, Doctor. Mr. Rob Gramlich, our next witness, is President of Grid Strategies, LLC. Prior to his current position, Mr. Gramlich oversaw transmission policy at the American Wind Energy Association as Senior Vice President for Government and Public Affairs, Interim CEO, and Policy Director. He was Economic Advisor to FERC Chairman Pat Wood III from 2001 to 2005. He has served on advisory committees for the United States Department of Energy and the North American Energy Standards Board as Vice Chair of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy and as Interim Executive Director of the Wind Energy Foundation. Mr. Gramlich has been the recipient of Energy Systems Integration Group Award, American Wind Energy Association's Technical Achievement Award, and the FERC's Exemplar of Public Service Award. He received a Bachelor of Arts with honors in economics from Colby College and a Master of Public Policy from the University of California, Berkeley. Welcome, Mr. Gramlich. I now recognize the Chairman of the full committee, Mr. Smith, to introduce our last witness.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate being able to introduce our last witness today, and that is Dr. Joseph Heppert, who is Vice President for Research at Texas Tech University. So happens that my district includes Fredericksburg, Texas, which has a satellite campus of Texas Tech with about 200 students, and believe me, I leverage that to the maximum extent possible. We are glad to welcome Dr. Heppert today to hear about how Texas Tech is contributing to research that benefits the electric grid. Previously, Dr. Heppert served as Associate Vice Chancellor for Research at the University of Kansas. He also chaired KU's Chemistry Department and was the founding director of the university's Center for Science Education. Dr. Heppert has been active in projects to improve science teaching and science teacher preparation and is the past chair of the American Chemical Society's Committee on Education. He is a fellow of the American Chemical Society and currently serves as chair of the American Chemical Society's Committee on Budget and Finance. Dr. Heppert received a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from San Jose State University and a PhD in Inorganic Chemistry, often thought to be the toughest subject, from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dr. Heppert, we welcome you and appreciate what Texas Tech is doing. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I now recognize Assistant Secretary Walker for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Weber, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member VC, and Ranking Member Johnson, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity today to discuss the priorities and research programs within the Department of Energy's Office of Electricity and Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Restoration. The Department of Energy is focused on ensuring that the energy infrastructure is capable of securing our national security. Therefore, the resilience and reliability of the nation's electric grid is of the utmost importance. OE and CSER collaborate with industry, academia, state and local governments, and other energy sector stakeholders on numerous research and development programs to achieve these objectives. Using the definition set forth in the Presidential Policy Directive 21, resilience is defined as, quote, the ability to prepare for and adapt to changing conditions and withstand and recover rapidly from disruption. Resilience includes the ability to withstand and recover from deliberate attacks, accidents, or naturally occurring threats or incidents. DOE, which is a national security agency with a comprehensive intelligence community-informed view of resilience, recognizes that the energy sector has been the main focus of cyber and physical threat attacks. I will seek to highlight the actions we at DOE are taking to address the very real risks we face. First, the former Office of Electricity Delivery and Reliability has been divided into two separate departments in order to significantly increase the focus commensurate with the known risk of cyber and physical threats, thereby creating the Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response, as well as the Office of Electricity. My office's first priority is the creation of a North American energy system resiliency model. This model capitalizes on previous national lab work and is being leveraged to fully understand the resiliency risks associated with operating a highly diversified, regionally isolated grid that supplies electric energy for North America. Most importantly, the model will include analysis regarding the significant interdependencies that have evolved over the last couple decades between the various energy infrastructures. Significantly, the model will highlight where there are strategic opportunities for specific capabilities offered by certain types of infrastructure. For example, energy storage for frequency control. Most importantly, from DOE's vantage point, the model will inform national security investments that will improve our overall resiliency capability. Another priority for OE is to revolutionize sensing technology utilization. The goal is to use high-fidelity, reasonable-cost sensing technology to integrate near real-time data into the North American grid model. We will also be able to use signature recognition and correlation modeling informed by artificial intelligence and machine-to-machine learning to significantly improve the performance of the grid. Furthermore, these efforts will enable strategic investments by highlighting system vulnerabilities and enhance the integration of distributed energy resources and the use of microgrids and energy storage. Storage, the holy grail of energy, has a huge role to play in national security. There are various initiatives within DOE focused on storage, from pumped storage to flow batteries. There has never been a time where the availability of megawatt-scale storage has been more important. OE is pursuing storage technology capable of providing reactive and real power control for bulk and distribution power systems, as well as frequency control. Working with the national laboratories, OE is pursuing 3 high-probability capabilities: flow batteries using aqueous-soluble organics, sodium-based batteries, and rechargeable zinc-manganese dioxide batteries. The potential contributions of storage to enhance national security across North America are astounding. OE and CSERS are members of the Grid Modernization Initiative. The GMI focuses on the development of new architectural concepts, tools, and technologies that will better measure and analyze, predict, and protect the grid. Originally consisting of OE and the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, the GMI has been expanded to include CSER, the Office of Fossil Energy, and the Office of Nuclear Energy to ensure a coordinated and comprehensive DOE approach to R&D. The Grid Modernization Lab Consortium is part of the GMI, and it established a strategic partnership between DOE and the national labs. We are presently defining the next multi-year plan to continue our efforts for our R&D projects with our labs. In conclusion, the energy sector continues to face challenges and threats every day. The department continues to pursue diverse yet targeted R&D projects to further enhance the resilience and reliability of our nation's grid and energy infrastructure necessary to ensure national security. The cutting-edge technologies developed at our national labs and the ongoing research and development conducted in collaboration with our public and private sector partners will continue to strengthen the resilience and reliability of the grid for years to come. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Sarrao, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Weber, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Vesey, Ranking Member Johnson, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to address future research opportunities for the United States' electric grid and to describe the many benefits and reduced risks that would result from a more integrated, resilient, and modernized grid infrastructure. My name is John Sarrao, and I'm the Principal Associate Director for Science, Technology, and Engineering at Los Alamos in New Mexico. My personal research and technical leadership career has emphasized national security science, from plutonium physics research to advanced materials design and discovery to stewarding Los Alamos' high-performance computing resources and simulation capabilities. Energy security is a national security priority, and Los Alamos National Laboratory has contributed meaningfully to energy security in general and grid resilience research in specific for many years. The challenges that today's domestic electricity grid face include the need for enhanced resilience against both natural events and external actors, robust optimization and control capability for integrating renewables, and expanded tools for grid operators to detect anomalies, including the effective utilization of machine learning methods. In responding to these challenges, Los Alamos brings expertise in physics and engineering, applied math and statistics, and simulation and computation. We further have a proven track record of providing mission-centric reachback expertise in weapons physics and design, including weapons effects, high-fidelity and multi-scale Earth systems modeling, and space science and space weather capabilities. Finally, Los Alamos is deeply committed to workforce development and idea dissemination, hosting a regular Grid Science Winter School and Conference to help educate and expand the grid research community. To further support these efforts, Los Alamos has launched the Advanced Network Science Initiative, ANSI. ANSI is designed to facilitate cross-project basic and applied research that is focused on modeling and understanding the nation's critical infrastructures, such as electric power, water, petroleum, and natural gas. Given our demonstrated history in infrastructure analysis and grid research, Los Alamos was excited to participate in the Grid Modernization Laboratory Consortium, the GMLC, beginning in fiscal year 2016. The initiative has allowed a number of national laboratories to work together, bringing their complementary capabilities to bear on key challenges and delivering positive impacts for our electricity grid. As we look to the future of grid research, both under the auspices of GMLC and more broadly, Los Alamos sees several important challenges that need to be addressed. First, complex threats to U.S. power systems. U.S. power systems are potentially vulnerable to large-scale impacts from complex threats, including geomagnetic disturbances and electromagnetic pulses from high-altitude nuclear detonation. Second, cyber-physical threats. Combined cyber and physical attacks on infrastructure can have widespread and lasting impacts on critical infrastructure. Developing a cyber-physical impact and consequences modeling and simulation capability will enable stakeholders to assess the possible consequences of different types of cyber attacks on critical infrastructure and prioritize additional investments. Third, gas grid-coupled systems. Natural gas pipelines are a key energy infrastructure for the United States, and they are only becoming more so with the addition of supply from unconventional natural gas resources. The expansion of central plant natural gas-fired electric generation and electric transmission system, and the expected expansion of gas-fired distribution generation electric distribution system further expand that. And fourth, grid water network coupling and control. Potable and wastewater systems are major electric loads that can be controlled to the benefit of both the water and electrical systems. With storage naturally built in, potable water networks are an infrastructure that could play a key role in advanced control and optimization of the electrical system. However, these water resources must also maintain their own reliability and resilience. I appreciate the opportunity in these brief remarks to describe some of the future challenges and research opportunities for the United States' electric grid that we see at Los Alamos. Success in these endeavors would result in a more integrated, resilient, and modernized grid infrastructure. The Grid Modernization Laboratory Consortium has been a positive step forward in addressing these issues, and Los Alamos has been proud to play a role in GMLC with our peer national laboratories. As we look to the future, we see additional challenges in responding to complex threats, including cyber-physical challenges, to our grid infrastructure, and in considering the integrated systems of systems represented by our coupled gas and electrical infrastructure at both the transmission and distribution scales. In closing, I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to appear before the subcommittee. I look forward to answering any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Mr. Gramlich. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Weber, Ranking Member VZ, and members of the subcommittee for inviting me to testify in the electric grid of the future. Since modern society requires affordable, clean, and reliable electricity for most commercial and personal pursuits, there is no infrastructure more important than the interstate electric network. While reliability is very high and growing, as reported by NERC just today over at FERC across town, the grid is evolving rapidly and threats are changing. We need to expand grid capacity, implement protections against severe weather and cyber and physical attack, and make more efficient use of the existing grid. DOE's Office of Electricity, OE, can play a key role in each of these areas. OE can contribute by continuing research, development, and demonstration of new technologies for the grid, promoting grid expansion through permitting and studies, developing and bringing grid operations technologies to market, developing customer-end reliability and resilience options for critical uses such as military facilities and hospitals, and supporting studies of bulk power system reliability to address the evolving resource mix and evolving threats. The National Academies of Sciences recently had a resilience report that had 12 recommendations. 8 of those were for DOE. OE could play a lead role in implementing those recommendations. Given the importance of a reliable electric grid to modern society and the critical role it plays in integrating new, both centralized and distributed resources in managing various threats, OE should have far greater resources than it has. At the same time, OE resources and attention should not be diverted to support the recently announced presidential directive to extend the lives of old coal and nuclear plants. Subsidizing such resources will ultimately harm rather than help customers, and OE's work on it will detract from its otherwise important mission. There is no basis for this directive or for DOE action under the Federal Power Act, Section 202C, or the Defense Production Act. The directive ignores some basic facts about electricity. It ignores that coal and nuclear plants are just as susceptible to cyber attack as any other facility. It ignores the fact that coal plants have fuel delivery interruptions and often have mechanical failures during cold weather. It ignores the fact that both coal and nuclear plants are particularly vulnerable to droughts, and there's some evidence to suggest EMP attacks as well. And it ignores that coal and nuclear plants shut down in response to voltage and frequency deviations in a narrower band of tolerance than, for example, wind plants. This is actually what happened in the 2003 blackout affecting 50 million people when a large FirstEnergy coal plant automatically shut itself down. The point here is not to, I should also say, the directive ignores that 50-year-old plants have outage rates that are typically 3 times as high as new plants. So the point here is not to criticize any one technology or a couple of technologies. All technology, all generating resources have their strengths and weaknesses and contribute to reliability and resilience in different ways, but none of them are essential. Reliability comes from having reserves. All generators fail to operate at some point. In fact, each region already has a strategic electric generation reserve. It's called a reserve margin, and they are in significant surplus condition right now in most regions. So whether or not there are national security interests at stake, the proposed solution will not help. Due to the futility of this directive, OE should steer clear of it and focus on what matters for electricity customers. OE's modeling to support the bailout plan should be scrutinized carefully so that resources are not diverted from valuable work on reliability, resilience, efficiency, and the grid's evolution, given changes in the resource mix and evolving threats. It will be important for Congress to rigorously oversee the Department of Energy and OE specifically to ensure that important work gets done and taxpayer dollars are not wasted on ill-conceived programs. Thank you.
Dr. Heppert, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Weber, Chairman Smith, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Vice President for Research and Professor of Chemistry at Texas Tech University, and I'm pleased to address you today on behalf of the Texas Tech University system. The Texas Tech University system's original mandate was to serve the educational needs of the citizens of West Texas, but its ambitions, as framed by its first president, have always been to make a mark in education, scholarship, and innovation for the nation and the world. Today, Texas Tech University system, or TEC as it's often referred to, ranks among the major public research universities in the United States. As many of you know from working with research universities in your states and districts, these institutions play a critical, innovative role in defining the future of energy grid research. Both natural hazards and actions by our adversaries can pose significant threats to our grid. The 2017 hurricane season was a harrowing reminder of the intense suffering and economic loss that natural events can inflict on regional scales. Communities in Texas, Florida, and Puerto Rico were, and in some cases continue to be, devastated in the aftermath of these storms. Based on modern scientific models of future weather events, the world can expect more frequent and more intense disruptions of this nature. At the same time, there's a growing consensus that future conflicts among major military and economic adversaries may involve preliminary skirmishes in cyberspace, with grid infrastructure as a prime target. Indeed, some recent cases provide indications that both state and non-state actors have already targeted and demonstrated an ability to threaten our grid. On top of this, any grid of tomorrow must be developed with the assumption that the market for renewable energy generation will only continue to grow, and in turn provide a more decentralized and therefore resilient system. In light of these challenges, and with generous support of the State of Texas, Department of Energy, and partners in industry and at the national laboratories, Texas Tech has been working hard to address a central question: how can we make the U.S. energy grid more secure, reliant, robust, and perhaps most importantly, resilient when under threat? Through the pioneering work of faculty at Texas Tech, we're providing answers. Dr. Bebe Ren in Tech's Whitaker College of Engineering has developed a novel architecture for smart grids that allows an array of diverse power sources to interface with the grid. Her research has overcome a major hurdle to enabling reliable, resilient, and affordable grid integration of renewables, with the real-world applicability of helping to rebuild Puerto Rico's communication infrastructure post-Hurricane Maria. Dr. Stephen Bain, a senior faculty member in the Whitaker College of Engineering's Department of Electrical Engineering, is a distinguished power grid researcher. Dr. Bain's group continues to develop techniques that enable grid integration when incorporating renewable energy sources, and have placed a number of instruments across Texas to monitor grids in near real time. This research, when coupled with innovative models that determine and predict the performance of systems relying on distributed generation such as wind, is critical to a more resilient and reliable grid. In 2015, the state of Texas provided $13 million for tech and several partners to construct GLEAM. When fully operational later this year, the Global Laboratory for Energy Asset Management and Manufacturing will provide a world-class distributed generation microgrid and unique platform for field testing, certification, and optimization of renewables and grid systems, new hardware and software solutions for managing grid function, and cybersecurity of grid systems. This work would not be possible without the support of Secretary Rick Perry. His vision as governor of Texas, of the state of Texas, was critical to making this facility possible. The innovative team of researchers across Tech is committed to a research vision that enables the electric grid of the future. Over the next 4 years, we intend to invest a minimum of $8 million in research into cybersecurity and energy grid resiliency to enable the creation of a sustainable and diverse energy economy. We're confident this investment will help the nation attain its goals in energy security, traditional and alternative energy utilization, and a 21st century energy grid. I'm proud to have the opportunity to share Texas Tech's capabilities, our expansive vision for the future, and serve as a resource for this subcommittee. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you for this invitation, and go Tech.
I'll leave that alone. So they've called votes, so we're going to recess, and we will reconvene immediately following the last vote. This hearing is now reconvened. I thank the witnesses for their testimony. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Walker, in your testimony, you stressed that OE's priorities are the development of grid modeling capabilities, megawatt-scale grid storage, and the Grid Modernization Initiative. As the smallest of the applied energy offices at DOE, how are you able to accomplish your research and development goals with a tight budget? Number one, I guess essentially, how does the OE do more with less? What do you say?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. The focus with OE is definitely on those three things, as well as sensing technology, and how we accomplish our mission is through the hard work of the people within OE and CSER, working in concert with the other applied sciences at DOE, so among fossil energy, nuclear energy, and the energy efficiency, primarily relying on the platform of the GMI, the GMLC, and that's in fact why we expanded the charter to include those other applied sciences, to be able to leverage and ensure that the investments we make are the best across the entire department, and to leverage the resources, equally from a national security perspective.
So prioritize. The programs within OE are squarely within the applied energy mission at the department, and OE research goals are closely tied to the needs of the energy industry. The department's fiscal year 2019 budget requests places an importance on federal funding going only towards early-stage research programs, What steps have you taken to ensure responsible stewardship of those taxpayer dollars by funding only the R&D that cannot be performed by the energy industry?
So at OE, we focus very much on early-stage research, utilizing our capabilities both on the CSER side as well as OE to identify where are the cutting-edge technologies that will not be, by virtue of the cost and, more importantly, the intellectual capability that is realized through our national labs. So we identify, using a risk-based approach, how to best invest that money.
Thank you. Dr. Heppert, this question is for you. In your testimony, you explain how Texas Tech University partners with both Sandia National Lab and the private industry to conduct research. What is the difference between research conducted at the Gleam facility and the research conducted at the Sandia Swift site? And then should there be more coordination between the national labs and academia on grid challenges like those identified in the GMI?
Sure. I think there's a degree of commonality in terms of some of the research. The Swift site really has been a test bed for understanding wind farms and the fundamental impact of atmospherics and of fluid flow through wind farms. We've got highly instrumented systems there with radar that can help us model that and help us understand the impact of environmental circumstances on the performance of those systems. So it's really in part about predictive modeling and understanding how to optimize the configuration and structure of future wind farms. Okay. The Gleam system is really going to be a test bed that will allow us to actually connect to some of these existing resources, in addition to some resources that are held in the private sector nearby of both wind power, solar power, and battery capabilities. The focus there is really going to be on being able to test bed new technologies, both software and hardware technologies, to allow us to understand how to better integrate those and more seamlessly integrate those systems. Model in real time, be able to model conditions that are going to lead to potentially to grid failure, and understand, using artificial intelligence strategies, how we can more effectively integrate these, and also how we can improve and enhance the economics of utilizing energy from these systems as well. So I would say on the one side, we're talking about looking more at the fundamentals of wind, and we're very pleased on that side that we'll be helping to co-host the wind blade design, conference that Sandia has held for many years at Sandia, this year in Lubbock. But on the other side, we're looking more at how we truly integrate these other technologies effectively, and it'll be a great test bed for being able to take, as I said, both AI technology and new power grid technologies, hardware, and integrate them into a system.
Thank you for that. Can you get the dates of that conference to our staff here?
I'll be happy to do that.
Yeah, okay, thank you. At this time, the chair recognizes Mr. Takano for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Heppert and Dr. Sarrao, the Trump administration has proposed a 37% cut in FY 2019 for the Office of Electricity, or OE, which stewards the largest portion of our federal investments in grid research. Within OE, the budget proposes a number of steep cuts to important research, including a 74% cut to smart grid research, a 67% cut to clean energy transmission and reliability, and an 81% cut to energy storage research and development. I just want to know from all of you, what role do you think energy storage and the development of battery storage can play when it comes to distributing wind and solar as well as grid resilience?
Well, I would say that the magnitude of the cuts you're referring to are quite concerning. We're dealing with technologies here that are really in development. The challenges we're facing in terms of the scale of renewables that have to be integrated into the grid has changed dramatically over the last 5 years. The challenges associated with both creating a resilient system, understanding how to use battery technology effectively in order to create a stable microgrid system and regional grid system, and doing the kind of effective modeling on how to optimize those systems. Those are all landscapes that are changing. And in addition to that, you'll recognize what a number of us talked about with regard to the security issues, which is a constantly changing landscape as well. So I think federal funding is critically important. Sustained federal funding is critically important for us to be able to take advantage and leverage some of the model systems that we've developed across the country, including what's going on within the SWIFT and GLEAM programs at my institution, but also other institutions. As far as impact is concerned on our programs, I would see, in any 1 year, we're in the vicinity of $2.5 million worth of funding that could potentially be impacted by some of those cuts. And that, again, that would make it very difficult for us to leverage the investment that the federal government, the national labs, and the state of Texas have already made in some of the unique model systems we have on our campus.
So thank you for the question. As you know, certainly a decrease in budget would create challenges. I think from a Los Alamos perspective, one of our goals is to use capabilities that derive from our broader national security mission focused on challenges of grid modeling so that we can diversify our efforts in that regard. Certainly our focus on early stage research as well as partnerships like the GMLC Enable cause us to be as effective as we can be. And then to your question about energy storage, I think thinking both about fundamental, for example, materials and chemistry research and energy storage, and how you think about that in the broader context of the electricity grid is something that our grid modeling efforts help enable so that we define the right challenges to focus on to address the problems in an environment that's potentially fiscally constrained.
Yeah. So, Mr. Gramlich, in your testimony, you note that the recent DOE Grid Reliability Staff Report found that, quote, increased deployment of solar and wind does and will not negatively impact the operation of the grid. Mr. Gramlich, what role do you think energy storage and development of battery storage can play when it comes to distributing wind and solar as well as grid resilience?
Thank you for the question. I think energy storage can provide many services to the grid, to customers specifically, to distribution systems, transmission systems, and to provide services that are typically considered generation services. So it's really the only technology that sort of provides almost some of everything. It will be, I think, important when we get to very high renewable energy futures. You can integrate a whole lot of wind and solar, I think, without a huge amount of storage now, currently, in most regional grids, but certainly island systems in other areas require more balancing. And over time, as penetrations of renewable variable resources grow, storage will become more and more important.
Well, great, thank you. My time is up, Mr. Chairman. I can yield back, please.
Okay, the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Walker, can you speak to the concerns that the more connected the grid becomes, more vulnerable it becomes to cyber attacks, similar to what happened in Ireland last year?
As Dan Coates, our Director of National Intelligence, noted, we are recognizing more frequent and more sophisticated cyber threats. There is no question that the grid is vulnerable to cyber threats, whether they're isolated or whether they're fully integrated. What is clear as we introduce cyber-enabled technologies through the Internet of Things and the advancements of things like smart grid, we introduce more and more devices on the system that have the capability of being penetrated through cyber. So it is extremely important that as we develop these newer technologies and as we integrate additional technology on the system, that we do it with a cybersecurity focus. We have just recently issued a funding opportunity for $25 million back into the oil and natural gas as well as electric sector to look at the architecture and the design of cyber-enabled devices in order to stave off the risk as we move forward and capitalize on the existing underlying physics on the system.
Well, I understand we want to protect our systems from being hacked, but also I think we've had some experiences, particularly in the last few years with hurricanes and in the last couple of decades with Katrina and others, where you lost whole sections of the power grid. And one of my concerns is if we had a major cyber attack or an EMP attack, is whether or not you have redundant systems, and I don't mean just having equipment to replace equipment that's been fried, basically, or whether or not how quickly you're able to shift from a technology control system to a manual system, whether or not you have trained employees that I see you're nodding your head there. Those are the concerns that I have is in terms of preparation, is how long would it take and depending on the time of year, how serious restoring power would become. And so that, Mr. Chairman, I think that's part of what we've got to figure out here is in the event that we have an attack like that, in cases for the storms, it takes anywhere from a day to a week. That's tolerable. But if you get into a situation where you have a massive loss of equipment and you can't shift to a manual system, then you really got a problem. Is that some of the things that I'm sure you're thinking through that?
That's absolutely what we are 100% focused on. So under the FAST Act, there was a requirement for the Secretary to identify defense critical electric infrastructure, and we continue to evolve that list of critical infrastructure with an understanding of what the impact is across the 16 critical infrastructure sectors throughout the United States. And we are developing within OE operational strategies that we're executing on some of those now to better ensure that when we do have those widespread events, whether it be cyber or hurricane, that we have capability to restore the system, whether that be, and that's one of the focuses of having a fuel-secure generation, source. When we have that, we don't have to rely on the supply chains and the risks associated with supply chains that might get realized during something like a cyber event or a hurricane, where there's destruction from, you know, the port all the way to any facility.
Well, maybe Mr. Gramlich and Mr. Heppert could address this, but when you're talking about a massive loss of the grid, and you look at it in the context of what's the first thing we do when we have a major storm? We go in with food and water and medicine, that sort of thing. And a massive loss of the grid, that will be the number one thing, because most people depend on the grocery store for their food and sustenance, things like that. So it's going to become absolutely critical that we either have redundant systems or the ability to shift to a manual system. And I'll let the gentleman respond to that, Mr. Chairman.
I think you're absolutely right, Congressman, that preparing for that situation in advance, low probability as it may be, is absolutely something that needs to be done. Personally, I think the National Academies of Sciences report recently was strong and had good recommendations in that area. So I would commend that for more information.
I'd come back again to the concept that having both diverse grids and grids that have survivability at the local level, where you can go down from a macroscopic grid to a microgrid, which will still operate, and where you can bring up portions of that grid rapidly as the technology becomes repaired, without risking bringing down the system again as a result of the initial insult, is something that's really critical. And I think that's part of the reason that the kind of modeling we've been describing and the kind of research that we're promoting is really important for the future.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, if you'll indulge me just for a moment here. I worked for a couple of engineering companies before running a think tank, and unless things have changed dramatically in the last 30 years, we have a patchwork grid. It's not a uniform grid. And in some cases, that could be helpful. But in other cases, in a massive loss, again, I want to emphasize, and to your point, it's a low probability, but we need to be prepared. A low probability event could have absolutely catastrophic and deadly consequences. So I really think that we need to be prepared for that. We need to recognize the fact that it is a diverse grid, it's a patchwork, and that we have some ability to address that in a relatively short amount of time. So with that, and you can comment on that as you will, but Mr. Chairman, thank you for indulging me, and I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Tonko, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Secretary Walker, it's good to see you again. Members of this committee may not know it, but Secretary Walker and I went through energy deregulation in New York State together. And I think it was a bold move. Our electricity markets may not be perfect, but they have blind spots, and I think Congress and states and grid operators and regulators can all work together to address some of those market failures. But in 2018, the toothpaste is out of the tube, and drastic and unnecessary market interventions under the false pretense of an emergency to bail out uncompetitive generators like the one being discussed by the administration, I think are unacceptable. Mr. Secretary, I will not ask you to respond to that, but I hope you will carry that message back to DOE. However, I do want to ask you about the future of Puerto Rico's grid. As we enter hurricane season, I'm concerned about the fragility, the lack of resilience of that system. Can you give us a sense of some of the recommendations and work that has been done to strengthen Puerto Rico's grid for the long term?
Sure. We have been working with Puerto Rico to develop a sophisticated modeling system that enables them to better operate their grid, and we've been working with the Technical Advisory Committee that was established by PREPA's board to accomplish that. That model will also help identify the relaying setting changes that need to occur in order to better optimize the grid so that they don't sustain the blackouts that they've recently seen over the last year or two. That being said, with the work that has been done from the emergency restoration component, equipment was put back in place consistent with the the standards, NES standards. So the lack of O&M that was done on the system, in one sense, has been cured because the weak pulls and the weak guying on their transmission system has been replaced. They are continuing and still working on one of the major transmission lines that goes through the north-south corridor. We are still there. DOE is providing technical assistance where we can for any of the technical components on the system, and we're still continuing to work with FEMA. The PREPA is continuing to identify some of the strategies that they will employ for any events that will be realized. And one of the key components is we still have a significant number of federal resources down on the island, including the generators which were supplied for the critical infrastructure, the ones that were referred to by Congressman Palmer. We recognize, and after the after-action reports that we've started to look at with PREPA and FEMA, highlight that the 2,000 plus generators that are down there represent those critical infrastructure that we really need to make sure that we've got either microgrid capabilities, distributed energy resources, so that when they do realize an event, it has less real impact on the safety and health of the people in Puerto Rico.
Thank you. And Mr. Gramlich, I would like to get your thoughts on this. Americans in Puerto Rico are reeling from the most devastating blackout in our nation's history. And obviously, Puerto Rico had unique challenges, but it is my understanding that many of its greatest grid vulnerabilities were damaged transmission and distribution systems, which is the cause of most disruptions in our continental U.S. So Puerto Rico could be a test bed and model for grid innovation. Do you have ideas about how Puerto Rico can rebuild to have a stronger, more modernized grid?
Sure, Congressman. I have not spent much time researching Puerto Rico, but generally we do have a lot of technologies and options that are available to any system that may be rebuilding its grid. And in fact, our mainland transmission grid is aging, and so we have opportunities to improve the technology there as well. One key area that DOE and OE specifically support is the development of microgrids or backup generation. So when we're talking about national security or military bases or other sort of critical uses, or hospitals or police stations or other critical needs, recognizing there are still tremendous efficiencies of the large grid and large regional markets and all of that, but there are also thousands of entry points and risks on such a system. So when you're focusing on the end-use customer and their critical reliability needs that may exist, those ability to have backup generation or islanding capability that DOE can help bring down the costs for will be very important.
Yeah, it seems as though in response to their need as an island, as a people, we can come up with a nice innovative response that will also serve as a template for what can be done across the continental U.S. So with that, Dr. Heppert, I don't know if you wanted to say something, but I'm out of time. So, but if the chair would allow for you to comment?
Sure.
With that, I would yield back.
I just wanted to point out that one of our faculty members, Dr. Wren, is involved in a collaboration with Puerto Rico Telecom, which involves a number of national laboratories, Pacific Northwest National Lab, Oak Ridge, as well as NREL, to implement some innovative new technology for democratizing their telecommunications grid and really bringing it back. So I think this has been a great example of how that partnership that the Omnibus Bill talks about between the private sector, universities, and national laboratories can really help to have an impact in real time on these kinds of situations.
Chairman, if I may address Congressman Tonko's question?
Go ahead. He needs all the help he can get.
Congressman, there are some very specific items that we are working with the labs on putting into Puerto Rico that are cutting edge. we're basically looking to accelerate the commercialization of them and therefore utilization on the mainland by putting them in Puerto Rico. So things like our darknet, which is the use of the black fiber on the optical ground wire, which is on their transmission system, is one idea. Using correlation through this high fidelity sensing capability to enable optimization of their grid is another. That will be utilized in conjunction with the development of sophisticated microgrids that have the capability to expand and contract, similar to some work that's being done at the Electric Power Board in Chattanooga with the Oak Ridge National Lab. So there are a number of very specific things that we think Puerto Rico is uniquely poised to be able to integrate. I've been working with Walt Higgins, who's the CEO, and my team has been working with HUD to help define the guidance document with the supplemental funding that Congress provided, all to ensure that these type of technologies, the microgrids, the DERs, really do get in. And one of the things that Congressman is very interesting, and you're very familiar with the Green Bank, one of the things we've talked about is actually a critical infrastructure bank in Puerto Rico, and the possibility of that to enable those 2,000 plus locations that we previously identified through the installation of generation to come up with unique ways to basically island themselves and provide the capabilities for public health and safety that they do.
Well, thank you for that info. I think it also speaks to the wisdom of not cutting research and innovation investments like ARPA-E and all. We are on the cutting edge. We're in an innovation economy, and we don't go backward. We need to go forward. So I would just say those investments are critical to be able to have those responses you just outlined. With that, Mr. Chair.
Chair, I recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Myers, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Thank all of you for being with us this afternoon. Secretary Walker, you previously stated on February 20th of this year, and I quote, "We would never use a 202 to stave off an economic issue. That's not what it's for." And now First Energy Solutions has recently asked the department to use a 202 to stave off an economic issue. Does that then imply, or do we understand that you won't use a 202 for them?
The 202 application from First Energy is being reviewed by my department as we speak.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm hoping that your earlier strong opinion will still prevail. The draft grid memo was circulated before the National Security Council last Friday, and it's widely understood that this draft came from the department intended to fulfill the President's June 1st directive to intervene in planned plant closures. But there's been an awful lot of pushback from people who are grid operators and grid experts. Specifically, the CEO of Exelon, the largest nuclear generator in the U.S., said, "The retirement of coal and nuclear plants do not constitute a grid emergency that warrants urgent intervention from the federal government." Secretary Walker, the president of the Electricity Consumers Resource Council, an association of the large industrial electricity users, said the latest DOE proposal would, quote, "devastate U.S. manufacturing." Have you calculated the costs on American business and specifically American manufacturing?
I have not.
The previous 403 proposal, which was rejected by FERC because it was unsubstantiated, they said it was going to increase consumer costs by $8 billion annually from PJM alone. Now, the new plan nationalizes the 403 proposal, so I would expect that $8 billion is going to go up very significantly. Again, in putting together this draft plan, have you estimated what this will cost the U.S. taxpayer?
I have not.
I have to give you wonderful credit for being able to answer these things very, very tightly. I would suggest, though, as a member of this committee, that moving forward with this new proposal, if it's going to devastate U.S. manufacturing, if it's going to add way more than $8 billion to the electricity costs of our American consumer, this is something that you and Secretary Perry and others should look very seriously at and should have numbers available for. I think it's within purview of, as a member of this committee, to ask you to go back and do the elementary research and report back to the committee on those two things, please. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to submit for the record a letter I led with 36 of my colleagues asking that Secretary Perry and the Trump administration cease the false narrative that bailing out uneconomic energy sources in competitive markets is needed for electrical grid resilience, and to stop the attempts to use emergency authorities to intervene in planned power plant retirements. And I'd like to make three official points on the inappropriate use of emergency authorities to bail out.
Let me say
planned
without,
power plant. Yes, sir.
without objection.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Number one, unlike these planned retirements in the PJM grid, we have a legitimate grid crisis in Puerto Rico. Thank you for addressing it. But we still have thousands of residents without power. The President himself has still not acknowledged the death toll, which we now understand to be higher than those lost on 9/11. This is his Katrina. Number two, this bailout plan does not actually help coal country. This is a short-term talking point that does nothing to create good-paying jobs, resilient jobs in the families in Appalachian. We need to work together with these resilient, industrious, great families to create good-paying jobs that will endure. And number three, the bailout plan ignores all the experts. Instead of listening to those in the universe of the world of energy grids, and despite knowing what this would cost the American public, the Trump administration is still moving ahead, perhaps, unfortunately, likely because someone contributed to the campaign. And this is not how our democracy is supposed to work. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman, and we now recognize Dr. Foster of Illinois for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. Maybe I'd like to switch over to some sort of high-level direction that you need from Congress and the American people to think about your specifications for what you want the grid to accomplish in terms of reliability. Because there are, people can be concerned about outages that are temporary, outages that, the tail risk of having an outage of 6 months or longer that can happen in some disaster scenarios. Insurance against that tail risk costs money. And there is a trade-off that, everyone in life and everyone in business faces as to how much we're willing to spend to reduce tail risks, how much spare inventory of different components we need to have on hand. Things like that. And so do you feel that you have adequate high-level guidance from Congress and the American people about what the specs you're shooting for? Or do you think we need a wider discussion of that and related issues?
Congressman, I'll answer the question from DOE's perspective. The DOE is one of three organizations that fundamentally analyzes the day-to-day operation of the electric grid. FERC is the other one, NERC is the other one, and each of us has different lenses by which we look at the system. FERC looks at it from a market-based, NERC from a reliability perspective, and DOE looks at it from a national security perspective. So from a national security perspective, the day-to-day reliability is not really something that we take a look at. Obviously, it's important. We contribute to it. We make R&D investments where it makes sense, but we also look at those investments from how they can be utilized from a national security standpoint. We recognize, particularly given the recent evolution of the grid, particularly its interdependence, mostly on gas pipelines, that we have now reached a point where, different than 20 or 30 years ago, where if I lose the wrong gas pipeline, I can lose tens of thousands of megawatts of generation simultaneously. And that simultaneous loss of all those generators can then have deleterious effects through, cascading frequency loss, as you well know as a physicist. And there are real risks in the system as a result of it. And unfortunately, when we built these systems, both the gas pipelines, oil pipelines, the electric transmission system, things like cybersecurity didn't even exist. And the word domestic terrorism was probably not even coined yet. But today, we deal with very significant risk every day. And while some may say it's a low probability, we deal with tens of thousands of cyber intrusions on a daily basis. It's just a matter of time before the sophistication level increases and those penetrations become real. We've seen this happen. We all watched the Ukraine event. So we can pretend that it doesn't exist, but we have hard evidence through actual realization of things like Ukraine that these capabilities exist and they're being utilized. And we spend our time focused on strategies that enable us to survive those type of events and avoid them.
Other comments?
Sure, Congressman. There is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC, that is in charge of reliability under the ERO provisions of the Energy Policy Act of 2005. I think that organization and the institutions around reliability need to remain in place. They are doing a good job. FERC oversees the markets and transmission system. Their role needs to be respected. I think what we're seeing with this presidential directive is, under the guise of national security, a nationalization of the electric system, which would be extremely damaging for the investment, the private investment that the industry currently relies on for all of the reliability and efficiencies that we get out of this power system.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's a tough situation where if, for example, one state decides that for their own purposes, they want to subsidize a class of electrical generation, and then if you're in a multi-state interconnected grid, that looks like dumping that will force, you know, other states' generation stations to close. And so this is a complex set of problems, because one state's, you know, necessary subsidy for some purpose is another, it's protectionism viewed from other states. And trying to understand how we, as nationally, deal with those misaligned incentives between the states, and not have the federal government come in with yet a third set of misaligned incentives for their own political reasons, it will be an ongoing challenge. And let's see, I have now negative 19 seconds, so I'll yield back.
I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments and written questions from members. This hearing is adjourned.
Thank you, Randy.
You bet.